Welcome to Ageless Enthusiasm. I'm your host, Mindy East, and today we have Tony Mattivi joining us. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Mindy. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so honored to have you on here. You've got such an incredible backstory. But before we get to that and all your service to our country, I'd love to hear about how you stay happy, healthy, and enjoying life.
Well, I try to stay active, and I try to do things that keep me mentally engaged and to keep learning. So, for example, I've been a licensed pilot since 1988, but I hadn't flown in many, many years. And recently I started flying again. And I love the fact that I'm learning new things every day. I'm staying mentally engaged, and I love that challenge.
And flying is so wonderful for your soul, isn't it?
It is. There's just something about being up in the air.
I bet.
Yeah.
You enjoy fishing.
I do.
And you're a runner.
I'm a plodder, not really a runner. I shuffle.
That's okay. And you play pickleball.
I do, yeah.
And
I hunt.
You hunt,
Yeah.
That's right. And you've got a great family. And your mother is still alive.
My mother is in her early 80s, and she is the most active 81-year-old that I've ever known. I'm pretty sure she's going to outlive me. Last time I was home in Colorado, we went for a 5-mile hike in the mountains together, and she's wonderful. I'm very lucky to be from the family that I'm from. My mom is the youngest of 12, and it's just good, decent stock, if you know what I mean, just good people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you live in the Topeka area, so
I do.
we're happy that you're down here to join us today. Your background is that of a federal prosecutor.
Right.
And you have been involved in many high-profile cases over the past 30 years. I really want to hear a little bit about your experience with the USS Cole and the bombing in Yemen. You were directly involved with that,
Right.
bringing justice to that case.
So when I started prosecuting speeding tickets in the DA's office in Topeka in 1993, I had no idea that 15 years later I would be standing in an expeditionary courtroom at Guantanamo Bay, representing or leading a team of joint military and civilian team of prosecutors prosecuting the guy that Osama bin Laden sent to Yemen to blow up the USS Cole. And the story of how I got there is kind of interesting, but it was one of the proudest moments of my life when I got to stand in front of that military judge and say, "Your Honor, my name is Tony Mattivi, and I represent the United States of America against this Al-Qaeda terrorist." So it was quite an experience.
Well, I know too that ship had to undergo some huge renovations to be seaworthy again.
Right.
And they brought it back to the United States just outside of Virginia, is that right?
So the ship was manufactured in Pascagoula. I think that's right, and that's where it went back to for the refurbishment.
Okay. And then you had an opportunity to actually be on the ship at one point.
I did.
After it was refurbished.
Right.
And before they send it out again, they run it through a battery of tests. And didn't you have a mountaintop experience being on that ship at one point?
I did. So not long after I started on the case, I joined the team of prosecutors. There were 3 of us at the time, me and an Army colonel and a Navy captain were the 3 prosecutors. And after I joined the team, one of the first things that our lead prosecutor did, Bob Cattell, was an Army colonel, he brought the skipper of the Cole at the time of the attack, a guy named Kirk Lippold. He brought Kirk into the office for a witness interview. And we interviewed him, and he walked us through the events. And Kirk and I kind of hit it off, and we became friends, and we remain friends today. But at the end, he said, "Let me know what I can do to help." And I said, "Well, look, I've never been on at that point, I'd never been on a ship at all, let alone a warship." And I said, "It would be really helpful to me if you could take me on board the ship and walk me through the events of the attack as from your perspective." And so he said, "Absolutely, no problem." So he looked into it, and Cole was in dry dock at the time in part of it. So those ships get completely refurbished every 8 years is the regular cycle. So they bring it into Norfolk, they put it in dry dock, they get rid of all the old electronics and put in all the new electronics, that kind of thing, battle systems, weapons. And so we got to go on board the ship. I took about a dozen of my team members on board, and we had the skipper walk us through the attack. where he was, what happened, things like that. And it was a fascinating experience. And at the end, the guy who was the captain of the ship at the time we were there hosted us for lunch in the wardroom, which is where the officers eat. And so I sat next to him and I thanked him very much for letting me bring the team on board. And I explained to him that I'd never been on a ship before. And he said, you can't prosecute a case like this without understanding how a destroyer lives and breathes. And so when Cole came out of dry dock before they deployed, they do a 4-day, what they call a shakedown cruise. And there's an evaluation team on board. And that ship operates 24/7, and the team puts them through every possible scenario that you can imagine. Man overboard drills, simulated attacks, daytime and nighttime refueling operations. And I got to go on that. And basically for 4 days, I got to stay glued to the hip of the captain and watch that ship operate under every imaginable condition. And at one point, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Ed said, before we turn in, let's go sit on the bridge wing and have a cigar. And so sitting on the bridge wing of the Cole with the skipper in the middle of the Atlantic, in the middle of the night, was just, it really was sort of a mountaintop experience.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Now, you were also in Baghdad, and so talk about being under attack. You were a civilian working for the DOJ.
Right.
And you had several close calls with enemy attacks while you were over there engaged in your activity.
Yeah, so in 2007, I was prosecuting drug cases in federal court in Topeka, and DOJ asked for volunteers with complex case experience to go to Iraq and help try the war crimes cases. And so I volunteered for that. And I'll tell you, it was the post 9/11 world. My children were very young. And one of the reasons that I volunteered to do it is I felt like it was important to show them that everybody has a part to play in making your country great, and that you don't have to be in the military to go help, right? And so I volunteered. I went over there for 6 months, and it was a big, scary thing. I mean, when I arrived in March of 2007, in the next 90 days, we had 88 rocket and mortar attacks on the Green Zone. The 4th day that I was there, 2 American contractors were killed in the Green Zone, actually right outside the chow hall where I ate all of my meals by a rocket attack. And while I was there, we saw General Petraeus's counterinsurgency strategy take hold. And by the time I left, in the last 30 days I was there, we had 4 attacks. So it was a dramatic difference in the level of violence between when I arrived and when I left.
Wow. Well, I love what you said, because as a parent, I too believe that, freedom is everybody's job. And that's something that we need to teach our children. I think it's very important that we teach our children a loyalty to the flag and our country as well.
I wish we as a country would impose some sort of mandatory service requirement. Not necessarily the military. I mean, there are young people for whom the military just isn't their calling, right? But those folks could do other things. They could go to work in the Peace Corps. They could go to work in healthcare. They could volunteer to serve their community in some other way. But I really do believe that we would be a better country if we had like a 1 or 2 year mandatory service requirement for our young people.
That's an excellent idea. Tell me how you think that would benefit our next generation.
I think it would ingrain in them the idea that we have an obligation or a debt to our country that we have to pay, each of us as an individual. America is a wonderful, fantastic place filled with freedom and opportunity and beauty. And I think we have people that are spoiled by how easy their life is, and they forget that they are reaping the tremendous benefit of living here, and that you have to give back. If we want it to stay the place that it is, everybody has to give back.
That could be a little bit controversial. What would you say to the critics who might think that we don't need that in our country at this point in time? Do you think, Tony, that we Americans are woefully uneducated when it comes to our government?
Yeah, I think we're woefully uneducated when it comes to our government, and we're woefully, many folks don't realize how good we have it here. Trust me, when you go to the Middle East and you see how those governments treat their people, you realize that it is a tremendous benefit to be able to live in a country like the United States, because not that many countries treat their people as well as we get treated here. But I'm often very surprised by how little people know about the government and about how it operates.
You were over in Baghdad, and I know you've been in Gitmo, and you have brought to trial, to justice, members of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But on the upside to that, you met a very interesting person that is still in your life at this point, someone named Naz.
Right. So when I was in Baghdad, my primary responsibility was to help the Iraqi prosecutors that were trying Chemical Ali. But a secondary responsibility was I was working with the State Department to help arrange visas for the local nationals, the Iraqis who supported us. And as we looked down the road, it didn't take a crystal ball to see that at some point there's going to be a drawdown of forces, the Americans are going to leave, and the people who helped us, if we left them behind, they would be in tremendous, tremendous danger. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of my responsibilities, but really one of my pleasures, to be able to help them deal with the State Department to get visas so that they could get out of the country when we left. And one of the really neat things about that experience is at my bank right now, the place that I bank, one of the folks who works there was my interpreter in Baghdad. And not only were we able to get her and her family visas and get them out of Iraq, but we were able to get them to come to Kansas. And so I sat, knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder with Naz in body armor and helmets in unair-conditioned offices in Iraq, negotiating and collaborating with high-level Iraqi officials. And it was an incredibly stressful, difficult experience. And to be able to see almost every day a person that I shared that intense experience with is a real joy and a real pleasure.
What an amazing story, because you helped her escape, essentially, a country that wasn't treating her right and gave her an opportunity that she wouldn't have had otherwise.
We were able, and not just me, but everybody who was there who helped with the process, we were able to give them a vehicle or a mechanism to get out of a very dangerous environment and to come to the United States. And I think that Naz and her family sort of embody the American dream.
Mm-hmm. I do too. Tell me a little bit about the case that you had right here in Wichita involving our airport.
Sure. So when I came back from my Guantanamo assignment in 2013, the office gave me the national security caseload. And very soon after that, we had a really significant investigation down here in Wichita where a guy named Terry Lowen, who was a Raytheon employee, he was a Vietnam-era Marine veteran who was an electronics technician and worked out at the airport. He radicalized online and joined Al-Qaeda. And he started out by offering to people that he met online that he believed were Al-Qaeda operatives. The investigation started really when he offered them his airport credentials so that they could get on to the airport in Wichita and commit an act of violence. And as it turns out that the person he was interacting with was an online undercover from the FBI. And as the conversation ensued, he decided that he didn't just want to provide his credentials, he wanted to be the person who committed the act of violence. And so he researched the airline flight schedules and he figured out when would the most airliners be on the ground here in Wichita and therefore have the most people on there that he could kill with an explosion. And then he set about trying to build a bomb. And he was an electronics technician, so he wired it all himself. And he actually had a plan at one point that he was going to detonate the bomb out on the tarmac, and he was looking for an accomplice to stand outside the airport with an automatic weapon and mow down people as they ran screaming away from the attack. And we were able to get an undercover in and interrupt him before he was able to do that. And we prosecuted him down here in federal court in front of Judge Balat here in the Wichita courthouse, and convicted him and sent him off to prison.
Wow. And I know with that type of everyday background, you probably need a release. You need an escape.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, let's go back a little bit about some of your downtime.
Sure.
Now, I know you, tell me about your fishing. I've seen some pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up in Colorado, and I grew up fishing for trout in the streams and rivers and lakes of Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I moved to Kansas, I started doing some very different fishing out here for crappie and bass, and I still enjoy that very much. But I also enjoy going home. I was home just a couple weeks ago, and I go fly fishing whenever I'm out in Colorado, and then I like to fish with my buddies out here as well.
Now, growing up in Colorado Springs in the shadow of Pikes Peak, did you always want to be a prosecutor?
No, not at all. So I dropped out of college the first time I went, and I became an EMT and then a paramedic. And then I decided that that college was unfinished business and I needed to go back. But I was working as a flight paramedic at the time. And so I learned that there was a degree program for aviation. So that's actually what brought me back to school, and that's why I got my pilot's license. But when I started, and college went so much better the second time around, I decided maybe I'd try graduate school. And I couldn't go to med school because I couldn't get through organic chemistry. So I decided to go to law school. But when I started law school, I thought I would probably do something healthcare related since I was a paramedic, mm-hmm. or maybe aviation related. And then the summer after first year of law school, I interned in the DA's office. And I knew from the moment that I walked in the door that I wanted to be a prosecutor.
How did you know?
It just felt right. I mean, I enjoyed being a paramedic, and I felt like that was sort of a calling. But by the time I left that to go to law school, I was done. I very much felt that same feeling when I walked into the DA's office. I felt like this is where I belong. This is what I'm supposed to do.
So if someone was looking for a change in their career direction or a pivot in their life, what would you tell them?
Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. That's very good.
Don't be afraid of big, scary things, because oftentimes they turn out really well, and sometimes they turn out life-changingly well.
Absolutely. Now, you did have a life-changing experience with a case in Garden City, yeah. And that led you to meeting an everyday hero.
Right.
I'd love to hear more about that.
I was uncomfortable with you referring to me as an everyday hero because I don't believe that's true. I do believe it's true of Dan Day, and I met Dan because he was a militia member in Southwest Kansas who the FBI went to interview about militia activity, and they ended up signing him up as an informant. And he was sort of helping them keep an eye on illegal activity in Southwest Kansas when he met a guy named Patrick Stein, who had an incredible hatred for Muslims and really wanted to kill them and drive them out of Southwest Kansas. So for those that don't know, Southwest Kansas has a large, it's a very diverse, Garden City is an amazingly diverse community. It's due in large part to the meat packing plant. And mm-hmm. a lot of those jobs in the meat packing plant are often held by refugees or by immigrant groups. And mm-hmm. Just in the time that I've been familiar with it, I mean, first it was Mexican immigrants from Mexico. Mm-hmm. Then it was immigrants from South America or Central America. Then it was East Asians, Vietnamese. And then lately it's been East Africans, the Somali refugees. Have held down those jobs in the meatpacking plant. And I don't know if you're familiar with the jobs or not, but they are gruesome, mm-hmm. tedious,
brutal,
difficult jobs. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people in this country who wouldn't ever want a job like that. They wouldn't do mm-hmm. a job like that. And these immigrants come here because of the opportunity that job presents. And they seize that opportunity like they're putting their hands on the American dream. So that's why you have that population. But even in a place as diverse as Garden City, those Somali refugees stand out, right? I mean, they look different, they dress differently, they're from a different religion, and they drew Patrick Stein's attention. And if you remember back what was happening in our country in 2015, 2016,
Right.
we were seeing lots of Al-Qaeda inspired attacks, a lot of ISIS inspired attacks. We had the San Bernardino shooting that was a very high profile ISIS inspired mass killing. We had 2 cases in Topeka, in Kansas, that I prosecuted. We had the Lowen case, an Al-Qaeda inspired violent extremist. In Topeka, we had Terry Lowen, an ISIS inspired violent extremist. And so that attracted Patrick's attention, and he, misguidedly thought that patriotism meant pushing out those refugees because they were so different from us. And then when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, he said in recordings that flipped a switch for him, and he went into organizational mode. And he and his group, over the next several months, developed a plan to bomb an apartment complex in Garden City that was inhabited exclusively by these Somali Muslim refugee families. And they did it, they planned to do it because they wanted to send a message to the refugees that they were not welcome. And they wanted to send a message to our government that they didn't want our government sending those people here, letting them into the country or sending them here. So that was their plan. And fortunately for us, Dan was willing to be an informant and to go to those meetings and to tell the FBI what was going on. And I really believe, of all of the high profile cases that I've prosecuted over the years, that's the one that I'm most proud of, because I really believe that had it not been for Dan's courage, we would have been staring over the edge of a smoking black hole at 312 Mary Street that would have been filled with the bodies of more than 100 dead refugees.
And you said that this would have been another Oklahoma City.
It absolutely would have been. These guys studied what McVeigh and Nichols did in Oklahoma City. They were patterning their attack after the Oklahoma City attack. They wanted to use the same kind of bomb, what's called an ANFO bomb, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, because that's what McVeigh and Nichols used. So they very much wanted to commit another Oklahoma City attack right here in Kansas. And I can't imagine how different Garden City would be today and how different our state would be today if they had been successful in carrying out that attack.
This case attracted the attention of George Stephanopoulos, who did a documentary called The Informant: Fear and Faith in the Heartland.
Right.
It really showcased Dan as an everyday hero. Tell me what you learned about Dan in that moment.
What I learned about Dan is that he had the heart of a hero. Dan didn't have to do what he did. He wanted not to do it. He was afraid of Patrick Stein. He was afraid of Curtis Allen, but he was more afraid that if he didn't do it, that Stein and Allen and Wright would kill dozens or hundreds of these immigrants. And he kept going because he knew that if he didn't, their blood would be on his hands. And he knew that he couldn't live with himself if that were the case. And one of the things that I mentioned in that documentary, George asked me, what does that tell you about heroism? And my answer was that it doesn't really matter who you are, it matters what you are, right? It matters what's inside you. And I mentioned in my closing argument in that case, because Dan was on the stand for 5 days. I've never seen a witness be on the stand for that long. And much of it was the defense teams, very competent, capable professional defense teams trying to tear him down and trying to pick his story apart and blaming him for this. And in closing argument, I said to the jury, I said, it's one thing when a law enforcement officer or a soldier or somebody who's been trained puts themselves in harm's way to protect innocent people that they don't even know. It's one thing when that's a trained professional who does that. It's another thing completely when it's just an average guy who does that. That to me is heroism. And Dan Day had to dig down deep, and he had to make himself keep going, and he did. And when he dug down deep, what he found was the heart of a hero.
And what would you say we need to do to have the heart of a hero?
I think it's really important to do the right thing at the right time, regardless of who's looking and regardless of the consequences. To me, that's what integrity is, and that's what heroism is.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. I'm Mindy East, your host of Ageless Enthusiasm.
Go back to talking.
Oh, boy.
So one of the questions that you gave me was what America means to me.
Yes.
And
I forgot to ask that.
That's okay.
Perfect.
But that's one of the things that I was
Go ahead
thinking.
and stop down.
One of the things I was thinking about, because I was going to say freedom.
So, Tony, what does America mean to you?
America to me means freedom and opportunity. We have so much opportunity here as individuals, and then we have the freedom to take advantage of that opportunity. That's what America means. You know, I had a conversation with my kid. I think it's the conversation that every parent has with their kid about you have the opportunity in this country to be anything that you want to be. And we had that conversation when we lived in Northern Virginia when I was working on the coal case. And my daughter, Hope, who is about to turn 20 and is my sassiest kid, Hope was in first grade. And I said, you have the opportunity to be whatever you want to be. And Hope said, that's awesome. She said, I want to be Mexican.
Oh.
And I said, what? What? She said, I want to be Mexican. And I said, Hope, you can't be Mexican. She said, you just said I could be anything that I wanted to be. So within reason, you can be anything you want to be.
Oh, that's cute. That's cute.
And I said,
Goals, right?
just out of curiosity, why? And she said, well, they have very colorful clothing and I like their food.
Oh, hey, I'm
And I
with
said,
her.
that's an excellent reason. And I said, but you understand you can't be Mexican, right? And she said, all right, well, then I'm going to marry a Mexican. And I said, okay, that would be
There
absolutely
you go.
fine. So,
My kind of girl.
yeah.
My kind of girl. That's cute.